Tom gripped the control stick as his cargo hauler shuddered violently through Dracarian Prime's atmosphere. Red warning lights flooded the cockpit while alarms screamed their desperate chorus. He'd been making supply runs for 8 years across 12 systems, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The NAV computer had malfunctioned 3 jumps back, and now the stabilizers were completely gone. Come on, Tom muttered through gritted teeth, fighting the stick as massive trees rushed up to meet him. The ship refused to respond. Metal groaned under impossible stress. Through the cracked viewport he could see the forest canopy approaching way too fast. This was going to hurt. The impact threw him against his harness so hard he felt ribs crack. The sound was unbelievable, metal shrieking, glass shattering, systems exploding all around him. The ship plowed through trees like they were paper, each collision jarring his bones. Then finally, mercifully, everything stopped. For a moment, Tom just sat there in the sudden silence, breathing hard. His ears rang. His vision swam. But he was alive. That was something. He unbuckled with shaking hands and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his left side, and he looked down to see blood seeping through his flight suit sleeve. His arm was badly gashed, probably from flying debris during the crash. The cockpit was destroyed, screens shattered, wiring hanging loose, the smell of burning electronics thick in the air. Tom forced himself to move. Sitting still meant dying, and he wasn't ready for that. He stumbled into the cargo bay, stepping over twisted metal and scattered supplies. Most of it was ruined, but he managed to grab what mattered: a thermal blanket still in its package, a handful of emergency rations, a basic med kit, and the old-fashioned fire starter his grandfather had given him years ago. Most pilots thought the fire starter was a joke. Technology had moved beyond such primitive tools centuries ago. Everyone relied on plasma heaters and fusion cores now. But Grandpa Jack had been insistent when he'd handed it over. "Technology fails, son," the old man had said with that knowing look in his eyes. "But fire? Fire never does. You remember that." Tom clutched it now like a lifeline. Grandpa Jack had always been right about the important things. A warning beep cut through his thoughts. Tom's blood went cold as he spotted the reactor core's display, what was left of it anyway. The numbers were climbing into the red zone. Critical meltdown in 15 minutes, maybe less. He needed to move. Now. Tom grabbed his salvage supplies and stumbled out into the alien forest. His legs felt weak, probably from shock, but adrenaline kept him moving. Behind him, the hauler groaned and hissed like a dying animal. Coolant leaked across the ground, and sparks showered from exposed wiring. The ship that had been his home for 8 years was seconds away from becoming his tomb. He counted in his head as he pushed deeper into the forest. 100 yards. 200. 300. The trees here were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They stretched impossibly high, their bark gleaming with some kind of iridescent sheen that caught the fading light. Strange calls echoed through the canopy, sounds that made every primitive instinct in Tom's human brain scream warnings about predators and danger. At 400 yards, the explosion hit. Even at that distance, the shockwave knocked Tom flat on his face. He tasted dirt and blood as heat washed over him. His ears rang so badly he couldn't hear anything for nearly a minute. When sound finally returned, it brought only the crackling of flames and the weird calls of whatever lived in this forest. Tom pushed himself up and looked back. A pillar of black smoke rose above the trees, marking where his ship had been. Where his way home had been. He was stranded now, truly and completely stranded, on a planet the Galactic Council had marked as forbidden territory. Dracarian Prime. Even the name made experienced spacers nervous. This was Dragon Country, home to the species that had destroyed 3 colonial attempts and killed thousands before the Council had finally declared it permanently off-limits. Nobody came here. Nobody was allowed to come here. And rescue? That was a fantasy. Company policy was crystal clear about forbidden zones. They didn't send rescue teams. They just marked you as lost and moved on. Tom was on his own. Night fell with startling speed. One moment the sky held hints of amber and gold, the next it was full dark. The temperature dropped like a stone, going from pleasantly warm to freezing in what felt like minutes. Tom's breath misted in the air as he huddled against a massive tree root. His injured arm had stopped bleeding at least, but it throbbed with every heartbeat. The forest around him came alive with sounds, rustling in the undergrowth, calls from creatures he couldn't see, the crack of branches that suggested something large moving through the darkness. Tom's hands shook as he cleared a small area of ground, pushing away leaves and debris until he reached bare soil. He arranged the driest wood he could find in the dim light, his fingers clumsy with cold and fear. The fire starter felt awkward in his grip, but he worked it the way Grandpa Jack had taught him during those camping trips in the Colorado mountains. Scrape, spark, scrape, spark. Come on. Finally, a spark caught. Smoke curled upward, thin and gray. Tom leaned down and blew gently, feeding the ember with his breath. A small flame flickered to life and relief flooded through him. He fed it carefully, adding twigs first, then larger pieces as the fire grew stronger. Within 20 minutes, he had a proper campfire burning. The warmth was immediate and glorious. Tom wrapped his thermal blanket around his shoulders and held his hands toward the flames, feeling sensation return to his numb fingers. This was fire, the oldest human technology, the first tool that had separated mankind from animals a million years ago. While the galaxy's advanced species had moved beyond it millennia ago, humans had never quite forgotten. And right now, that primitive knowledge was the only thing keeping Tom alive. He opened the med kit with stiff fingers and cleaned his arm wound as best he could. It hurt like hell and he had to bite down on his blanket to keep from screaming. The antiseptic burned worse than the original injury. But he got it bandaged, wrapping it tight to keep pressure on the wound. It wasn't pretty, but it would do. Tom ate one of his protein rations mechanically, barely tasting it. He had maybe a week's worth of food if he was careful. Water would be a problem soon. His canteen was only half full. But those were tomorrow's problems. Tonight he just needed to survive until morning. Exhaustion pulled at him like gravity. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving only bone-deep weariness and the terrible realization of his situation. Nobody was coming. Nobody even knew where to look. His family back on Earth Station 7 would get a notification that he'd been lost in a navigation accident. They'd grieve, they'd move on, and they'd never know what really happened out here. Tom stared into the fire, watching flames dance and flicker. His eyes grew heavy. Maybe he'd just rest for a minute. Just close his eyes for... A sound cut through the darkness. Not the predatory calls he'd been hearing all evening. Something different. Higher pitched. Almost like crying? Tom's hand moved instinctively to the plasma cutter on his belt, but he didn't draw it. He listened, head tilted. There it was again, a chirping sound, plaintive and distressed. It reminded him of the stray kitten he'd found behind his apartment 3 years ago, cold and scared and calling for help. The sound grew closer. Tom tensed, ready to grab his weapon if needed. But something about that cry made him hesitate. It wasn't aggressive. It was scared. Then it emerged into his firelight and Tom's breath caught in his throat. Baby dragon. The creature was tiny, barely the size of a house cat. Its scales shimmered deep purple in the firelight, catching and reflecting the glow like polished gems. Delicate wings were folded tight against its small body, and frost had crystallized on its snout and around its eyes. The dragon shivered violently, its whole body trembling. Those golden eyes, bright and aware and so very young, reflected the flames as it stared at the fire like a drowning man stares at a lifeline. Tom knew what this was. Every spacer knew. Dragons. The species that had killed thousands. The reason this entire planet was forbidden. The monsters of 100 cautionary tales told in spaceport bars across the galaxy. But all Tom saw in that moment was a baby, freezing to death in front of him. The dragon took another stumbling step toward his fire and collapsed at the edge of the light. Tom stared at the baby dragon for what felt like an eternity, his mind spinning through everything he'd ever been taught. Dragons were killers. That's what the training videos said. That's what every regulation stated. The Galactic Council had entire volumes dedicated to why dragons were too dangerous for any contact whatsoever. 3 colonial ships had been destroyed. Thousands had died. This species was forbidden for a reason. But looking at this tiny creature collapsed in front of him, Tom couldn't reconcile those stories with what he was seeing. This wasn't a monster. This was a baby and it was dying right in front of him. He made his decision in a heartbeat. Tom crawled forward slowly, wincing as his injured ribs protested the movement. Every instinct told him this was stupid. This was how people died in horror stories, approaching the creature they should be running from. But he couldn't just watch it die. His conscience wouldn't let him. The baby dragon's eyes tracked his movement, but it was too weak to do more than twitch. Tom could see its sides heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Its body temperature was all wrong, he could tell just from looking. Dragons were supposed to be warm-blooded, almost hot to the touch. But this one felt cold. So desperately cold. "Easy now," Tom murmured, his voice soft. "I've got you. You're okay." He reached out carefully and scooped the creature up. It was surprisingly light, weighing maybe 10 pounds at most. And cold, God, it was like holding a block of ice. The scales felt smooth under his hands, almost like polished stone. The baby dragon made a weak chirping sound but didn't resist as Tom lifted it. Tom carried it back to his fire and settled against the tree root again, cradling the dragon against his chest. He unwrapped his thermal blanket and bundled both of them inside it, tucking the edges around the small creature. The dragon immediately burrowed closer, seeking any warmth it could find. Tom could feel its rapid heartbeat against his own ribs. "There you go," he said quietly, adjusting his position to give the dragon maximum warmth. "That's better, right?" He fed more wood into the fire, building it higher and hotter. The flames roared up, casting dancing shadows across the alien forest. Tom held the dragon close, rubbing its scales gently the way his sister used to warm her hands on cold mornings back home. The friction seemed to help. Slowly, gradually, the violent shivering began to ease. An hour passed. Then another. Tom didn't dare move even though his legs were going numb and his back ached from the awkward position. He just kept the fire burning and kept the dragon warm. Slowly, remarkably, the creature's breathing steadied. The desperate gasping gave way to something deeper, more regular. Color seemed to return to its scales. They brightened from dull purple to something that almost glowed in the firelight. Those golden eyes, which had been dim and unfocused, began to clear. The dragon lifted its head slightly and looked up at Tom. Really looked at him with an awareness that was startling. Then it made a small sound, not the desperate chirping from before but something softer. Almost curious. Tom's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, reminding him he'd only eaten one ration bar since the crash. He had maybe 6 left. A week's worth of food if he was careful. 5 days if he wasn't. He looked down at the dragon in his arms. The creature was watching him with those bright, intelligent eyes. Tom sighed. He knew this was stupid. He knew he should save every scrap of food for himself. But he couldn't help it. "You hungry too?" he asked. Tom pulled out another ration bar and unwrapped it with one hand, the other still holding the dragon secure. He broke off a small piece and held it near the dragon's snout. The creature sniffed cautiously, its tiny nostrils flaring. Then a forked tongue flicked out, bright pink and surprisingly quick. The dragon took the food delicately, almost politely, and swallowed. A moment later it chirped, a completely different sound this time. Happy. Eager. The dragon opened its mouth expectantly, like a baby bird. Tom couldn't help but smile despite everything. "Yeah, I figured you'd say that." He fed the dragon several more pieces, watching as strength visibly returned to the small creature. By the time half the ration bar was gone, the dragon was actively moving around in his lap, exploring its blanket nest with obvious curiosity. Its tail swished back and forth, nearly smacking Tom in the face a couple times. The dragon investigated his hands with its snout, sniffing and gently touching everything with that quick tongue. "You're feeling better, aren't you?" Tom said, amused despite his dire situation. Guess food and warmth worked the same on every species. The dragon chirped in response and climbed up his chest, tiny claws pricking through his flight suit. It reached his shoulder and nuzzled against his neck, making that soft rumbling sound that was almost like a purr. Tom froze, barely breathing. Those claws were sharp. Those teeth, even baby-sized, could probably do real damage. But the dragon just settled there, warm and content, as if Tom's shoulder was exactly where it belonged. The absurdity of the situation hit him all at once. He was stranded on a forbidden planet, injured and alone, with maybe a week to live if he was lucky. And he just used precious supplies to rescue a baby dragon, a member of the species that had killed thousands of his fellow humans. But somehow, feeling that small warm weight on his shoulder, hearing those contented sounds, Tom didn't regret it. Not even a little bit. Night deepened around them. The alien forest was full of sounds, rustles and calls and the occasional roar of something massive in the distance. Every sound made Tom tense, but he kept the fire burning bright. The baby dragon would occasionally chirp at the darkness, and Tom found himself making soothing sounds back, the way he used to comfort his nephew when the kid had nightmares. "It's okay," he murmured. "We're safe here. The fire will keep us warm." Hours passed. Tom tried to stay awake, but exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on him. His eyes grew heavier and heavier. The dragon had curled up on his chest now, nestled right over his heart. Its scales had warmed considerably, no longer cold like ice but pleasantly warm. Almost hot, actually. The heat radiated through Tom's shirt, comfortable and soothing. He noticed their breathing had synchronized somehow. The dragon's chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm with his own. And out. And out. Steady and peaceful. Tom's eyes finally closed. Just for a minute, he told himself. Just a short rest. When dawn broke over the alien forest, painting everything in shades of gold and green, Tom woke with a start. He'd slept through the entire night, something he never would have thought possible under these circumstances. The fire had burned down to embers, but it was still giving off heat. And the baby dragon was still there, curled up under his chin, making tiny contented sounds in its sleep. Tom looked down at the creature and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This little dragon had trusted him, had chosen him when it was scared and dying. And Tom had responded the way humans always did when faced with something helpless and in need. He'd helped. The dragon stirred and yawned, revealing a mouth full of tiny needle-sharp teeth. Then it looked up at Tom and chirped brightly as if saying good morning. "Morning to you too," Tom said with a tired smile. He pulled out another ration bar, down to 5 now, and shared it. The dragon ate enthusiastically, its tail wagging like an excited puppy. As he watched the little creature eat, Tom assessed his situation with clearer eyes. He was still stranded. Still injured. Still probably going to die out here. But now he had a responsibility beyond just himself. This baby dragon needed to get home, back to its family. And Tom was going to make sure that happened, even if it was the last thing he did. "All right, little one," he said, scratching gently under the dragon's chin. The creature closed its eyes and made that rumbling purr again. "We need to get you back to your family. You've got parents somewhere who are probably worried sick." The dragon tilted its head as if considering his words. "I'm going to call you Ember," Tom decided, "because you showed up at my fire and you're warm like a coal. That work for you?" Ember chirped and breathed out a tiny puff of smoke no bigger than a sigh. Tom laughed, actually laughed, for the first time since the crash. "I'll take that as a yes." He fashioned a makeshift sling from part of his torn flight suit, creating a pouch he could carry Ember in against his chest. The baby dragon settled into it immediately, poking its head out to look around with bright, curious eyes. Tom stood up slowly, testing his injuries. Everything hurt, but nothing felt worse than yesterday. That was something. He studied the forest, looking for any sign of where dragons might nest. Scorched bark on trees. Large tracks. Anything that might point him in the right direction. The forest seemed older and denser to the west, where the trees grew even more massive. Ancient places were where ancient creatures lived. That was as true on Earth as anywhere else. It was as good a direction as any. "All right, Ember," Tom said, adjusting the sling. "Let's get you home." 200 miles above the forest canopy, Captain Reed stood on the bridge of the enforcement vessel Mandate, studying scan reports with cold, calculating eyes. Finding the crashed cargo hauler had been easy enough. The ship's signature lit up their sensors like a beacon. What concerned him wasn't the crash itself, it was the location. Dracarian Prime, Lieutenant Hayes said nervously beside him, her voice tight. "Sir, the regulations are very clear about this. We're not supposed to." "I know what the regulations say," Reed cut her off sharply. He pulled up the cargo manifest on his display, and his eyes gleamed. 70,000 credits worth of rare earth minerals, plus another 30,000 in processed goods. The mining company would pay handsomely for their return, no questions asked. As for the pilot, well, the pilot had crashed in forbidden space. He was officially dead the moment he went down. "Prep a recovery team. Full combat gear. We go in fast, grab the cargo and leave no trace." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "And if we encounter dragons, sir?" Reed's smile was thin and sharp. "Then we follow the actual protocol, eliminate any witnesses to our presence. Dragon-human doesn't matter. Nobody can know we were here." Far below, deep in a network of caverns that stretched for miles beneath the ancient forest, the dragon matriarch named Skyfire paced anxiously. Her massive form scraped against stone walls that had been carved smooth by generations of her kind. Around her, a dozen adult dragons waited in tense silence, their scales gleaming in the bioluminescent light of the cavern fungi. 2 days, Skyfire said, her voice heavy with a mother's worry. "Our daughter has been missing for 2 full days." The explosion scattered every scent trail, Thunderwing rumbled beside her. Her mate was even larger than she was, his blue scales marked with the scars of countless battles. "That ship's crash set half the western forest on fire. Everything smells like smoke and burning metal." Skyfire stopped pacing and fixed him with a fierce look. "She's out there somewhere. Cold. Scared. Maybe hurt. We should have found her by now." "Ashclaw is tracking," another dragon offered. "If anyone can find her trail, he can." As if summoned by his name, Ashclaw landed at the cavern entrance with a rush of wings. The lean silver dragon's scales were streaked with soot, and his expression was troubled in a way that made Skyfire's heart sink. "You found something," she said. It wasn't a question. "I found her," Ashclaw confirmed, and relief flooded through the cavern. Then he added carefully, "But you're not going to believe where she is." "Where?" Skyfire demanded, already moving toward the entrance. "Take me to her now." "She's with the one from the crashed ship," Ashclaw said, and every dragon in the cavern went still. "A human." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before the cavern erupted in roars of rage. Dragons surged forward, wings spreading, claws scraping stone. The sound was deafening. "Silence." Skyfire's command cut through the chaos like a blade. The other dragons fell quiet, but their anger vibrated in the air. She turned back to Ashclaw, forcing herself to stay calm. "Explain." "Everything." Ashclaw took a breath. "I tracked her scent to a clearing in the western forest. The human was there. He'd built a fire, an actual fire with wood the old way. When I arrived, the hatchling was wrapped in fabric, nestled against his chest. She was warm. Federal content." "A trick," Thunderwing growled. "Using our daughter as bait." "Bait for what?" Ashclaw countered. "He's alone, injured, and lost. He has limited supplies and no way off this planet. I watched him for hours. He shared his food with her, food he clearly needs himself. He kept her warm through the night. This morning I saw him teach her to hunt small creatures. He's carrying her in a sling he made, speaking to her constantly, protecting her like she's his own offspring." Skyfire felt her mind racing. Humans. She knew of them, the young species that had joined the Galactic Council only recently. The ones the other races mocked for still using primitive fire, for being too emotional, too attached to old ways. The species everyone considered backward. "It makes no sense," she said slowly. "Every species in the galaxy has hunted us. Why would a human help a dragon?" "I don't know," Ashclaw admitted. "But I know what I saw. He's not hurting her. If anything, he's sacrificing his own survival to keep her safe." Skyfire made her decision. "Where are they now?" "Moving west toward the old nesting grounds. At his pace, with his injuries, they'll arrive by nightfall." "Then we watch," Skyfire commanded. "But we watch closely. Every moment. If this human so much as threatens my daughter, I'll burn him to ash myself." Tom's legs felt like they were made of lead by late afternoon. Every step sent pain shooting through his ribs, and his injured arm throbbed with a dull, constant ache. But he kept walking, following the signs he'd been finding. Massive claw marks scored deep into tree bark. Patches of ground that had been scorched black, probably from dragon fire. And bones, huge bones from creatures Tom couldn't identify, picked completely clean. He was definitely in dragon territory now. Ember seemed to sense it too. The baby dragon had become more active in the sling, chirping loudly and squirming to look around. Tom let the little dragon out to walk, watching as Ember scampered ahead excitedly, then back to Tom, then ahead again. The dragon's tail wagged constantly, like a dog recognizing familiar territory. "We're close, aren't we?" Tom said, following Ember's lead. "You know this place." They emerged into a clearing just as the sun began painting the sky orange and gold. Tom immediately started gathering wood for a fire. It had become routine now: find a safe spot, build a fire, keep warm. The basics of human survival, unchanged for a million years. Ember helped this time, breathing tiny flames onto the kindling Tom had arranged. The fire caught quickly, crackling to life. Tom smiled at their teamwork. 3 days ago, he'd been a cargo pilot who barely remembered his grandfather's camping lessons. Now he was making fires in an alien forest with a baby dragon as his assistant. Life was strange sometimes. He'd just gotten the fire burning properly when Ember suddenly went rigid. The baby dragon's head swiveled toward the tree line, and a sharp chirp escaped its throat, different from any sound Tom had heard before. This one was louder, more urgent. Calling out. Tom's hand moved instinctively to the plasma cutter on his belt, but he didn't draw it. His heart hammered in his chest as massive shapes began emerging from the shadows between the trees. Dragons. Real, full-grown, massive dragons. The lead dragon was enormous, easily 40 feet from nose to tail, with scales that gleamed like polished rubies in the fading light. Steam rose from its nostrils with each breath. Its eyes were ancient and fierce and locked directly on Tom with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. This wasn't an animal. This was a person as real and aware as Tom himself. Behind the massive red dragon, others appeared. Tom counted at least 8, maybe more. They moved with deadly grace, fanning out to surround the clearing, cutting off any escape. Tom's mouth went dry. This was it. This was how he died. Then Ember chirped excitedly and ran straight toward the massive red dragon. Tom started to call out to warn the baby away but stopped himself. He watched, frozen, as the huge dragon lowered its head to the ground. Ember climbed right up onto that enormous snout and nuzzled against it, making happy sounds. The big dragon, clearly Ember's mother, made a deep rumbling noise that was unmistakably affectionate. She nuzzled her baby back, checking Ember over with obvious maternal concern. "Your mom," Tom said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You found your mom." The matriarch finished examining her daughter, seeming to satisfy herself that Ember was unhurt. Then those ancient, intelligent eyes turned back to Tom. The dragon took a step forward, and Tom had to fight every instinct telling him to run. He raised his hands slowly, palms out, showing he wasn't armed. "I was just trying to get her home," Tom said. He had no idea if the dragon could understand human speech, but he had to try. "She was freezing to death. I couldn't just leave her there. I would never hurt her. I promise." The matriarch took another step closer. Tom could feel the heat radiating from her massive body, could smell the sulfur on her breath. She was close enough now that one snap of those jaws would end him instantly. Then the sky exploded with plasma fire and everything went to hell. Retried. The first plasma bolt hit the tree beside Tom's head, and the ancient wood exploded in a shower of splinters and flame. Tom dove to the ground on pure instinct, his injured arm screaming in protest as he hit the dirt. Through the chaos and smoke, he saw them. 6 figures in black enforcement armor dropping from a hovering transport, plasma rifles raised and firing. "Target acquired," one of them shouted over the comm system, his voice amplified and distorted. "Multiple hostiles. Engaging." The dragons roared, and the sound was like standing inside a thunderstorm. It shook Tom's chest, rattled his teeth, made his ears ring. The massive creatures scattered for cover as more plasma bolts tore through the clearing, superheating the air and leaving scorch marks across the ground. But the enforcement team wasn't aiming at Tom. They were aiming at the dragons. Specifically at the matriarch, who'd been standing closest to Tom. Through the smoke and confusion, Tom saw Ember. The baby dragon was terrified, frozen in place between her mother and the attacking humans. Her golden eyes were wide with panic, and she was making high-pitched distress calls that cut straight through Tom's heart. Tom didn't think. He just moved. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, ignoring the pain in his ribs and the blood now flowing fresh from his arm wound. A plasma bolt streaked past where his head had been a second earlier. Another hit the ground in front of him, spraying him with superheated dirt. He didn't stop. "Ember!" Tom shouted. "Come here." The baby dragon saw him and ran. Not toward her mother, not toward the other adult dragons who could protect her, toward Tom. Toward the human who'd kept her warm and fed and safe. Her instincts drove her toward the one who'd already proven he would protect her. Tom scooped Ember up and immediately curled his body around her, making himself a shield. He tucked the dragon against his chest and hunched over, covering as much of her small form as he could with his own body. A plasma bolt screamed through the air, aimed directly at where Ember had been standing. It hit Tom instead. White-hot agony exploded across his back as the edge of the blast caught him. The shot wasn't direct. If it had been, Tom would have been vaporized, but even a glancing hit from a plasma weapon was enough to sear flesh and muscle. Tom bit down on his tongue to keep from screaming, tasting blood. But he didn't let go of Ember. He held on tighter, curling around the baby dragon like his life depended on it. Maybe it did. "Cease fire," Tom shouted, his voice raw. "They're not attacking. Stop shooting." "Negative," Captain Reed's voice crackled through the enforcement team's speakers. "Council regulations state all dragons are hostile. Protocol requires termination on sight. You're in violation of forbidden space law, pilot. Stand aside or be considered an accomplice." Tom looked up at Reed through the smoke. The captain's face was visible behind his helmet visor, and what Tom saw there made his blood run cold. This wasn't about dragons or regulations. This was about the cargo. About eliminating witnesses. Reed would kill him and every dragon here, then claim it was all by the book. Another plasma bolt streaked toward Ember, aimed with lethal precision. Tom saw it coming and twisted, putting his back between the weapon and the dragon. The bolt hit his thermal blanket, and the synthetic fabric ignited instantly. Fire spread across Tom's back, adding burning to the already searing pain from the plasma wound. Tom rolled, smothering the flames against the ground, his arms still locked around Ember. The baby dragon was trembling violently against his chest but unhurt. She looked up at Tom with those golden eyes and something passed between them. Trust. Pure, absolute trust. Ember knew, somehow, that this human would die before letting her come to harm. The matriarch saw it too. Tom felt the ground shake as the massive dragon moved. He looked up, expecting to see her attacking the enforcement team, expecting chaos and death. But Skyfire had frozen in place, her ancient eyes locked on Tom. On the human who'd just taken a plasma blast meant for her child. On the human who was literally burning to protect a dragon. For a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then Skyfire roared, and this time it wasn't a sound of rage. It was a command. The other dragons exploded from cover with terrifying speed. But they didn't attack the humans, they went for the weapons. A massive blue dragon's tail whipped out like a wrecking ball, sending 2 rifles spinning through the air. Another dragon's claws slashed through a rifle's barrel, rendering it useless. A third dragon simply grabbed a weapon in its jaws and crushed it like tin foil. Within seconds, the enforcement team was completely disarmed. Captain Reed stumbled backward, reaching for his sidearm with shaking hands. Thunderwing landed directly in front of him with a ground-shaking thud. The massive blue dragon lowered his head until his snout was inches from Reed's face. Steam billowed from Thunderwing's nostrils, hot enough to make Reed's visor fog up instantly. "Wait!" Tom called out, forcing himself to his feet with Ember still clutched against his chest. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through his burned and wounded back, but he pushed through it. "Don't kill them. Please." The matriarch turned to look at Tom. Her expression was unreadable, but Tom saw the question there. What? Why would he protect these humans who just tried to kill her and her child? "Because they're scared," Tom said, his voice steady despite the pain. "They've been taught you're monsters. They don't know what I know. They don't understand." He looked directly at Reed. "But they will. Everyone will. Eventually." Skyfire studied Tom for a long moment. This human was burned, bleeding, barely able to stand. By all rights, he should hate dragons. One had nearly killed him once and now he'd been hurt again trying to protect one. But instead he was asking for mercy. For understanding. Even for his own species who'd attacked without provocation. The matriarch made her decision. She approached Tom slowly, each step deliberate and careful. Tom's instincts screamed at him to back away from the approaching predator, but he held his ground. Ember chirped softly against his chest, making encouraging sounds. Skyfire lowered her massive head until it was level with Tom's face. He could feel the heat radiating from her scales, could smell sulfur and something else, something almost like cinnamon. Her eyes, ancient and intelligent, studied him carefully. Then deliberately she turned her head and breathed a small flame, not at Tom but at his dying campfire. The flames roared back to life, burning bright and warm. It was a gesture. Recognition. The matriarch was acknowledging what Tom had done. Fire was sacred to dragons. It was life, warmth, and protection. And this human had used fire not as a weapon, but to save a dragon's life. He'd shared warmth when he had little to give. He'd protected when he had every reason to run. Tom understood. He nodded slowly. "Thank you." Ember squirmed and Tom reluctantly set the baby dragon down. Immediately, Ember ran to her mother, chittering excitedly and looking back at Tom repeatedly as if telling Skyfire everything that had happened. The matriarch nuzzled her daughter gently, relief evident in every across his back. The world tilted sideways and darkness rushed in from the edges of his vision. The last thing Tom saw before consciousness left him was Skyfire's massive form moving forward, and the surprising gentleness with which the dragon caught him before he could hit the ground. Lieutenant Hayes broke free from the silver dragon that had been watching her and ran toward Captain Reed. "Sir, we need to leave. Now, before they change their minds." But Reed was staring at the scene in front of him with dawning horror. The dragons weren't killing the human. They were protecting him. He could see Ember climbing onto the unconscious man's chest, curling up there protectively. Could see the matriarch cradling the human with one massive claw, careful not to pierce him with her talons. This was first contact. Peaceful first contact with a sentient species. And Reed had just fired on them. His suit recorder had captured everything. The unprovoked attack, Tom protecting the baby dragon, the dragons showing restraint and mercy. His career wasn't just over. He was looking at prison time. Maybe life. Reed met the matriarch's eyes. Skyfire's gaze was filled with unmistakable contempt and something else. Disappointment, maybe? As if she'd expected better from humans and had been let down. She jerked her massive head toward the transport hovering above. The message was clear: get out. Now, while we're still letting you. Move, Reed ordered his team, his voice hollow. Everyone back to the ship. Now. The enforcement team scrambled aboard their transport, and within seconds the vessel lifted off into the darkening sky. They left behind their destroyed weapons, their dignity, and any chance of covering up what had happened here. Below, in the clearing, Skyfire gently lifted the unconscious human with one massive claw. Ember refused to leave Tom's chest, chirping anxiously and nuzzling against his face. "Bring him to the nesting caverns," Skyfire commanded her clan. "This human saved my daughter's life. We will save his." Ashclaw landed beside her. "What happens when he wakes, matriarch? He's seen our home. He knows we're sentient. The galaxy will demand answers." Skyfire looked down at the human who'd shielded her child with his own body. At the burns he'd suffered, the blood he'd lost, all to protect a dragon he barely knew. "Then perhaps," she said slowly, "it's time the galaxy learned something new." Tom woke to warmth and the sound of breathing all around him. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to soft light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He was lying on something surprisingly comfortable, layers of thick velvety moss that felt almost like a mattress. His injuries had been bandaged with strips of material he didn't recognize, smooth and cool against his skin. The burning agony from his back had dulled to a manageable ache. A familiar weight rested on his chest. Ember was curled up there, fast asleep, her tiny sides rising and falling with each breath. Tom carefully reached up and stroked the baby dragon's scales. Ember made a contented sound without waking, nuzzling closer to his hand. Tom looked around and felt his breath catch. He was inside a massive cavern, but not like any cave he'd ever seen. The walls were smooth and intentionally carved, with patterns that suggested artistry and purpose. Bioluminescent fungi grew in clusters along the ceiling and walls, creating pools of soft blue-green light. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were dragons. Dozens of them. Maybe more. They ranged from babies smaller than Ember to ancient creatures that must have been 70 or 80 feet long. Some had scales that gleamed like precious metals, gold, silver, bronze. Others were deep reds, blues, greens, and purples. And they were all watching him. Tom sat up slowly, mindful of his injuries. Ember woke with a chirp and immediately started licking his face with her warm tongue, clearly happy he was awake. Despite the dozens of predators surrounding him, Tom found himself smiling. "Hey there, little one. Miss me?" The matriarch approached, her massive form somehow graceful even in the confined space. She lowered her head and made a series of sounds, not random noises but something structured. Deliberate. Language. Tom's heart raced as understanding hit him. This wasn't just communication. This was conversation. The dragons were trying to talk to him. I don't understand," Tom said carefully. Then he tried something else. He pointed to himself. "Tom. My name is Tom." Skyfire tilted her head, considering. Then she did something that made Tom's jaw drop. She breathed out slowly, and the air itself seemed to shimmer and dance. An image formed in the vapor, crude but unmistakable. A dragon. Then a human. Then both standing together. It was a question Tom realized. She was asking if humans and dragons could coexist. Tom's throat tightened with emotion. "Yes," he said, nodding emphatically. He gestured between himself and the matriarch. "Yes, we can. We should." Approval rumbled through the cavern from the watching dragons. But Skyfire wasn't done. She created another vapor image, and this one made Tom's chest ache. Ships attacking dragons. Dragons fleeing, hiding in caves. Centuries of persecution shone in moments of swirling mist. "I'm so sorry," Tom said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "We were wrong. All of us. We were taught you were monsters, but you're not. You're just protecting your families. That's all you've ever been doing." He looked around at the gathered dragons, meeting as many eyes as he could. "You're people. Just like us. And we should have seen that from the beginning." Skyfire created one more image, the enforcement team shooting at Ember and Tom covering her with his own body. The matriarch touched Tom's chest gently with one massive claw, right over his heart. Then she touched her own chest in the same spot. The gesture transcended species. Heart to heart. Life for life. Tom had protected her child and she would protect him. Thunderwing approached, carrying something carefully in his claws. It was a scale, massive and crimson, nearly the size of Tom's hand. The matriarch's mate placed it reverently in Tom's lap. Then Ember chirped and, with obvious effort, worked loose one of her own tiny purple scales. The baby dragon presented it to Tom with great ceremony, as if giving him a treasure. Tom accepted both scales with trembling hands. He understood the weight of what he was being given. These weren't just souvenirs. They were proof, credentials, and most importantly, trust. You want me to be your voice, Tom said slowly, realization dawning. To tell the galaxy what really happened here. To show them you're not the enemy. Skyfire rumbled affirmatively. But then she created another vapor image. This one showed many ships, all attacking. A warning. She was telling Tom that speaking the truth would come at a cost. People wouldn't want to believe. They'd call him a liar, a madman. They might even see him as a traitor. I know, Tom said quietly. They'll think I've lost my mind. They'll say I'm making it up or that I've been brainwashed somehow. But I have these scales. And that enforcement team has recordings. And most importantly, I know the truth now. He looked around at the dragons again, at Ember sitting proudly on his lap, at the ancient creatures who'd chosen mercy over vengeance. Fire isn't just something humans make. It's something we share. Warmth, protection, kindness, those things aren't unique to any one species. You've shown me that. Over the next 3 days, Tom lived among the dragons. They brought him food, mostly fish from underground rivers and fruits that grew in the deep forest. Some of it was strange, but all of it was edible. They showed him their history, carved into stone tablets that lined the cavern walls. Tom couldn't read the dragon script, but the images told stories spanning thousands of years. He learned that dragons had once traded with other worlds, back before the current galactic powers had risen. They'd been peaceful explorers, curious about other species. But fear and misunderstanding had turned them into hunted creatures. They'd retreated here to Dracarian Prime, hoping isolation would keep them safe. Ember became Tom's constant companion and unofficial teacher. The baby dragon followed him everywhere, chittering excitedly and showing him things. Tom taught Ember human words, simple games, and how to play fetch with smooth stones. In return, Ember taught him dragon sounds, not full language but enough to communicate basic ideas like hungry, warm, safe, and friend. On the 4th day, a lean silver dragon Tom recognized as Ashclaw returned from a scouting flight. The dragon spoke to Skyfire in their rumbling language, and Tom saw the matriarch's expression shift. She turned to him and created a vapor image of a ship, different from the enforcement vessel. Civilian. A rescue ship. Tom's heart leaped. Someone had picked up his distress beacon. Someone was coming for him. Skyfire called a gathering, and every dragon in the nesting cavern assembled. She addressed them with roars and rumbles that echoed off the stone walls. Tom couldn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. This was a moment of decision. The matriarch was choosing to trust a human with their greatest secret. Their location, their sapience, their very existence. Not all the dragons agreed. Tom could see it in their body language, hear it in their responding calls. But Skyfire's authority held. She turned to Tom and lowered her head one final time. This time, she pressed her snout gently to his forehead and held it there for several heartbeats. Her scales were warm, almost hot, but not burning. It felt like a benediction. A blessing. When she pulled back, she breathed one final vapor image. A human carrying fire. A dragon offering warmth. 2 species reaching across an impossible divide. Tom clutched the 2 scales to his chest. I'll tell them, he promised. I'll make them understand. And if they don't listen the first time, I'll keep trying. However long it takes. The dragons escorted Tom through the forest to a clearing where a rescue ship could land safely. When the vessel touched down and Captain Rivera emerged with her crew, weapons drawn and ready for trouble, they found something they never expected. Their missing pilot was standing calmly in the center of a dragon circle. His clothes were torn and blood-stained, his arm was bandaged and burns marked his back. But he was alive. And there was a baby dragon perched on his shoulder like it belonged there. Tom? Rivera's voice cracked with disbelief. Her finger hovered over her weapon's trigger, but she didn't fire. What in the hell is going on? Tom held up the 2 scales so everyone could see them clearly. It's a long story, Captain. But it's one the galaxy needs to hear. These dragons aren't our enemies. They never were. We just never tried to understand them before. Ember chirped and nuzzled against Tom's neck. Behind them, Skyfire and her clan watched silently. The matriarch's ancient eyes were fixed on Tom, trusting him to do what humans had never done before, speak truth to power even when it was difficult. Dragons are people, Tom continued, his voice steady. They have families. They have culture and history. They feel love and fear just like we do. And they're willing to give us a second chance, despite everything we've done to them. Rivera slowly lowered her weapon. She was recording this. Her suit camera captured everything. You're serious. Dead serious, Tom said. He looked back at Skyfire and nodded once. Then he turned to Rivera. Take me to the council. I need to tell them what happened here. Tom gently set Ember down and knelt before the baby dragon. Ember chirped sadly, understanding this was goodbye. Tom scratched under her chin one last time, feeling the warmth of her scales. Be good for your mom, he whispered. And maybe one day I'll come back to visit. Ember breathed a tiny puff of smoke, her version of a kiss, and scampered back to Skyfire. The matriarch gathered her daughter close, but her eyes never left Tom's. Tom boarded the rescue ship, and as it lifted off, he pressed his hand against the viewport. Below, the dragons watched until the ship disappeared into the sky. Skyfire stood at the center, her daughter safe beside her, wondering if she'd made the right choice. Do you think he'll succeed? Thunderwing asked quietly. I think, Skyfire replied, that humans understand something the rest of the galaxy has forgotten. They remember that fire is meant to be shared, not feared. And perhaps they'll teach others to remember too. 3 months later, Tom stood before the Galactic Council as humanity's first ambassador to Dracarian Prime. Representatives from dozens of species filled the chamber, and most of them were laughing. They called his story fabrication. They dismissed his recordings as clever fakes. They said dragons were animals incapable of higher thought. But humans listened. Because humans still remembered fire. Humans still told stories of befriending wolves and taming wild horses. Humans understood that intelligence came in many forms, and compassion could bridge any gap. When a mining corporation tried to invade dragon territory 6 months later, ignoring council orders, it was human ships that formed a blockade. Human negotiators who sat down with the dragons. Human empathy that built the first real bridge between species in 1,000 years. All because one cargo pilot had lit a fire to stay warm, and a baby dragon had crawled into his lap seeking the same thing every living creature needed: warmth, safety, and kindness. In his apartment on Earth Station 7, Tom kept the 2 scales mounted on his wall. Below them, a simple plaque read, "Fire is meant to be shared." Sometimes late at night, Tom would hold those scales and remember. Remember the weight of Ember in his arms. Remember Skyfire's trust. Remember the moment he'd chosen compassion over fear. And on Dracarian Prime, in a cavern deep beneath an ancient forest, a young dragon named Ember kept a piece of thermal blanket, remembering the human who'd chosen warmth over everything else. The galaxy was learning. Slowly, stubbornly, but surely learning. And in the space between stars and fire, humans and dragons were building something that had seemed impossible. Not dominance. Not submission. Just friendship offered freely across species lines, one small act of kindness at a time.